One soldier, one folded flag, one woman standing alone against an entire system that forgot what honor means. When the airline told her she couldn't stay with the remains she was escorting, she didn't argue. She just stood her ground. And the world noticed. The airport speakers crackled to life, calling passengers for an early morning flight to Norfolk, Virginia. Most people barely noticed, juggling coffee cups, tapping on their phones, shuffling through security. But standing off to the side at Gate C-17 was Lieutenant Brianna Cole, dressed in full Army uniform, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of her chest. She looked exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of what she was carrying. A folded flag tucked neatly under her arm and a sealed envelope with official orders inside. Today wasn't about her. It was about bringing someone home. Private Daniel Harper, only 19, had been part of her unit overseas. The kid had this habit of smiling at the worst times. Muddy, tired, hungry. He'd still crack a joke to make the others laugh. But war doesn't care who smiles. A roadside blast ended his story too soon. Now it was Brianna's duty, her final act of respect, to escort his remains back to his family in Roanoke, Virginia. She'd done this once before, but this one hit harder. Daniel reminded her of her younger brother. She took a seat near the window, watching planes taxi in the distance. The sky outside was gray, like it understood the mood. Passengers around her were in their own little worlds, earbuds in, faces lit by phone screens. Across from her, an older woman looked up, gave her a soft smile, and said quietly, "Thank you for your service." Brianna nodded, offering a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am. Just doing my part." But deep down, she wasn't thinking about service. She was thinking about Daniel's mother, how she'd stand by the casket at the small-town airport, trying not to collapse when the flag was handed to her. When the gate agent's voice came over the intercom, Brianna gathered her things and walked to the counter. Her tone was calm, professional. "Lieutenant Brianna Cole, I'm escorting remains under military order to Norfolk. Here are my travel documents." The woman behind the desk, early 40s, sharp glasses, a blue airline scarf tied tight, glanced at the papers and hesitated. Give me one moment, please." Brianna nodded, stepping aside. She'd done this before. Sometimes the airline had to verify something. But as the minutes passed, she saw the agent whisper to another employee, then pick up the phone. She could tell by the tone something wasn't right. The woman's eyes darted toward her, then back to the screen. A few moments later, the agent came back and said, "Lieutenant, could you please confirm what you're traveling with today?" Brianna's brow furrowed slightly. "Yes, ma'am. I'm escorting the remains of Private Harper, U.S. Army, deceased in active service. The remains are secured in cargo, and I'm under instruction to remain with them until arrival." The agent pursed her lips. "Right. I see. Well, unfortunately, that won't be possible." Brianna blinked. "Excuse me? You won't be able to board with the remains. Our cargo department has strict regulations. You'll have to wait for clearance, and possibly take a later flight." Brianna took a slow breath, keeping her composure. "Ma'am, with respect, that's not how this works. I'm on direct orders from the Department of Defense to escort this soldier. I can't let him travel unattended." The agent's expression stiffened. "I understand, but our policy doesn't allow—" Brianna interrupted softly. "Policy or not, I have orders. You can call the military liaison if you need to, but I'm not leaving this gate." Passengers began to notice. A few heads turned. The sound of zippers, murmurs, coffee cups clinking, it all faded under the weight of the tension. The agent forced a smile that wasn't really a smile. "Lieutenant, please don't raise your voice. We're just following procedure." Brianna's voice stayed steady. "I'm not raising my voice. I'm explaining protocol. A fallen soldier doesn't travel as cargo. He travels with an escort. That's me." The woman folded her arms. "Well, I'll have to call my supervisor." "That's fine," Brianna said, her patience thinning. "I'll wait right here." She turned slightly, scanning the room. A man in a business suit was staring, pretending not to. A mother whispered to her teenage son, probably explaining what was happening. Brianna swallowed hard. She wasn't angry. Not yet. But there was something about this moment that felt off. Not the first time she'd dealt with bureaucracy, but this time, it felt personal. After 10 minutes, the supervisor arrived. a taller man with a badge clipped to his belt and a tone that carried authority. He looked at Brianna's uniform, then at the agent. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked. The agent gestured at the documents. "She's insisting on boarding with military remains, but our system doesn't allow—" The man cut her off. "Let me take a look." He scanned the paperwork, nodding to himself. His tone was neutral, almost detached. "Lieutenant Cole, correct?" "Yes, sir." "I understand your position, but our current regulations prohibit personnel from accompanying cargo in the same hold. You'll need to board separately or wait for clearance." Brianna's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her voice controlled. "With respect, sir, these are not ordinary cargo. This is a soldier's remains. I'm under orders to be present for the entire transport." "I'm sorry," the man said, glancing at the line forming behind her, "but we can't make exceptions." "It's a safety issue." "Safety issue?" she repeated quietly. "Sir, this isn't about safety. This is about respect." A few people in line murmured, and someone behind her whispered, "She's a soldier. Let her through." The man sighed, clearly uncomfortable now. "Ma'am, please step aside while we sort this out." Brianna stood still. "I can step aside," she said finally, "but I'm not going anywhere until that plane takes off with both of us on board." The supervisor gave a small, forced chuckle. "Let's not make this into a scene." She didn't respond. She just looked past him, out at the window again, at the cloudy sky and the faint reflection of herself in the glass. She thought of Daniel's parents, of his flag, of the promise she made to his unit when they zipped up his bag. This wasn't about policy. It was about a young man's final journey home. But what started as a small misunderstanding was about to turn into something much bigger. Something no one at Gate C-17 would forget. The supervisor walked away for a moment, muttering something into his radio. The gate agent returned to her keyboard, pretending to type, but clearly shaken. The silence between her and Lieutenant Brianna Cole hung thick, interrupted only by the occasional boarding announcement echoing over the speakers. Brianna checked her watch. 8:27 a.m. The flight was scheduled to board in less than 20 minutes. Her orders were clear. Remain with Private Harper's remains at all times, ensure a respectful handoff upon arrival, and notify the local military liaison immediately upon landing. That was the mission. Simple, routine, but nothing felt routine about this morning. "Lieutenant Cole," the supervisor said finally, stepping closer. "I spoke to the cargo department. They're confirming the status of the remains. It'll take a little while." She looked at him evenly. "Sir, we don't have a little while. That aircraft leaves at 9. I need to be on it." "I understand," he said, voice patient but patronizing. "But you need to understand, too. We can't just wave people through because of rank or uniform." "This isn't about rank," Brianna replied quietly. "It's about duty." Her voice wasn't raised, but there was a steadiness in it that drew attention. A few passengers nearby stopped scrolling their phones. One woman in line leaned toward her husband and whispered, "What's happening?" The husband shrugged. "Military thing, I think." Brianna turned slightly toward the window again. The cargo truck sat on the tarmac, a long silver container being prepared for loading. She could almost see the shape of the flag-draped case inside. She knew that within that wooden casket was the folded uniform, the tags, and what was left of a 19-year-old who trusted her to bring him home. And now, bureaucracy was standing in the way of a promise. The gate agent cleared her throat. "Lieutenant, maybe you should take a seat while we sort this out." Brianna's eyes flicked to her name tag, T. Reynolds. "Ms. Reynolds," she said, "with respect, if I sit down, I might as well be saying, this doesn't matter." "And it matters, more than you can imagine." Reynolds sighed. "I understand that, but—" "Do you?" Brianna's voice softened, but didn't waver. "Do you understand what it means to carry someone's remains home? To look their mother in the eyes and hand her a folded flag, knowing it's all she'll ever get back of her son?" The woman's face paled. The people waiting behind Brianna fell silent. The supervisor tried to interject, his voice lower now, trying to de-escalate. "Lieutenant, please. I respect what you're doing, but we have policies, procedures." "And I have orders," Brianna said. "Military protocol requires me to remain with the remains of a fallen soldier until delivery. That's non-negotiable." The supervisor rubbed his forehead. "We're not trying to disrespect anyone." "Then don't," she said simply. For a long moment, no one spoke. A man in a gray hoodie a few seats away pulled out his phone. He hit record, quietly, almost out of instinct. Another passenger followed. They didn't know what was happening, not fully, but they could feel it. That same quiet tension that fills a room right before something meaningful happens. The intercom blared to life again. Flight 452 to Norfolk, now boarding Group A. Brianna turned back toward the counter. That's my flight. Ma'am, Reynolds began. We haven't cleared... Brianna stepped forward. Then clear it. Her words weren't loud, but they carried weight. The kind that came from years of service, years of keeping composure under pressure. She slid the paperwork across the counter again. The supervisor frowned. Lieutenant, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. She looked at him, calm but firm. I'm not making it harder. I'm doing my job. The man glanced at Reynolds, then back at Brianna. We'll have to check with corporate policy before we proceed. Corporate policy? She repeated, a mix of disbelief and restraint in her tone. This is a soldier's final journey home. He's not a shipment. He's not a parcel. He's a person. You don't separate a soldier from the one they're responsible for. Not in life and not in death. Reynolds hesitated, lowering her eyes. The supervisor seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of Brianna's words. For a brief second, guilt flickered across his face. But procedure had its grip on him tighter than empathy did. Passengers were watching openly now. A teenage boy whispered, "She's right," and his father gave a slow nod. The agent's radio crackled again. Cargo to Gate C-17. We have confirmation on military transfer case under code AR-24, awaiting escort clearance. Reynolds pressed the button to reply. Stand by. There's an issue. The voice on the other end sounded irritated. What kind of issue? Before she could respond, Brianna leaned slightly closer and said, Tell them the escort is ready and waiting. Reynolds froze, unsure whether to comply. Brianna's tone softened. Please. Something in that please made Reynolds hesitate. She turned back to the mic. Copy that. Escort is ready and waiting. The supervisor gave her a sharp look, but she ignored it. Brianna took a step back and adjusted her cap, her uniform still immaculate despite the growing tension. She didn't want to embarrass anyone. She just wanted to do right by her fallen soldier. The intercom chimed again, this time calling Group B. The line of passengers started to move forward, glancing between the gate agents and the uniformed woman standing her ground. The man in the hoodie whispered to his phone, This lady's trying to escort a fallen soldier, and they're giving her trouble. His voice was quiet, but you could hear the disbelief. Reynolds looked down at her monitor again, typing furiously. Lieutenant, I'm trying to override the restriction, but the system's not letting me print your boarding pass. I'll wait, Brianna said, but I'm not walking away. The supervisor exhaled. You're putting us in a difficult position. So is telling a soldier she can't honor the dead, Brianna replied. Her words landed like a stone dropped in still water, heavy and impossible to ignore. A flight attendant approached the counter, whispering something to the supervisor. He nodded, rubbing his temples. Whatever this was, it wasn't going away quietly. A few feet away, a young woman wearing earbuds quietly mouthed, God bless her. Brianna didn't hear it. She was too focused on the mission, on keeping herself together. Every second ticking by felt like a test of patience, a test of dignity. The man in the hoodie stopped recording for a moment and whispered to another passenger, If this doesn't get fixed, I'm posting the video. Reynolds' fingers hovered over the keyboard again. She pressed a key, frowned, pressed another, then finally said, Okay, I think I can get you checked in manually. The supervisor looked startled. Wait, what are you doing? I'm fixing it, she said quietly. Brianna didn't smile, but her shoulders eased slightly. Thank you. Reynolds didn't look up. Don't thank me yet, Lieutenant. I might get in trouble for this, Brianna's voice softened. Then we'll both take the heat. The moment hung there, human, raw, and fragile. But just as it seemed things might settle, a voice crackled over the intercom, asking all airline staff to report to Gate C-17 immediately. Whatever was coming next would take this confrontation to a whole new level. The intercom announcement sent a ripple through the gate area. 3 more employees hurried over, 2 in airline uniforms and 1 in a gray suit with a lanyard that read, Operations. You could tell by the way he carried himself that he was used to being obeyed. All right, what's going on here? He asked sharply. The The supervisor pointed toward Brianna, who stood a few feet away, posture straight, eyes calm. She's insisting on boarding with military cargo. Says she's under orders. The man adjusted his tie, already frowning. Ma'am, may I see your documents? Brianna stepped forward, handing him the envelope. Lieutenant Brianna Cole, escorting the remains of Private First Class Daniel Harper, U.S. Army, Flight 452 to Norfolk. He flipped through the papers like he was skimming a grocery list. And you're aware, Lieutenant, that airline policy prohibits passengers from accompanying any form of restricted cargo? Brianna met his eyes. Yes, sir. And you're aware that the Department of Defense requires an escort to remain with the remains of a fallen soldier at all times during transport. His jaw tightened. This isn't a military flight. No, sir. But that doesn't change my orders. The man sighed and motioned to the gate agent. Get me the cargo manifest. Reynolds, the agent, retrieved a clipboard and handed it over. He scanned it quickly, tapping the paper. Here it is. Item AR-24, classified as human remains, armed forces, transported in compliance with federal regulations, escorted by... He stopped mid-sentence. Wait. There's a discrepancy here. Brianna leaned in. What discrepancy? He turned the paper toward her. This manifest doesn't list you as the assigned escort. The name field is blank. Her stomach dropped. That's not possible. He shrugged. It's what's on record. No escort listed, which means we can't release the cargo under your authority. Brianna took a steady breath. Sir, the manifest is wrong. You can call Fort Belvoir Military Transport Command. They'll confirm I'm assigned to Private Harper. I don't have time to make phone calls, Lieutenant. My responsibility is the airline, not the Army. You're responsible for both when you carry someone who died for this country, she said firmly. He froze, just for a second. You could see in his face that her words hit, but he brushed it off. Ma'am, please. We're all just doing our jobs. Then do it right, Brianna said. The man's nostrils flared. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. Brianna looked around. Dozens of passengers were watching openly now. A man in a baseball cap muttered, This is unbelievable. A woman whispered, Why don't they just let her go? She's clearly military. Someone else added, They're gonna regret this. The tension was thick enough to taste. Brianna took a half step back, straightened her shoulders, and said, Sir, you can check your system, call your contact, or confirm with base transport. But I'm not leaving this gate. The man turned to the supervisor. Call security. The crowd gasped. Brianna didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on him. Not angry, not scared, just disappointed. Sir, she said quietly, you really want security to remove a soldier escorting a fallen comrade? He hesitated. You're obstructing operations. I'm following orders. The man's radio crackled before he could respond. Operations. This is cargo. We need confirmation that the military escort is cleared. We can't load until we have sign-off. He pressed the button on his radio. Still pending. Stand by. He looked back at Brianna, frustration written all over his face. See? Even they can't proceed, Brianna nodded slowly. Then we're all waiting for the same thing. Someone to do the right thing. A hush fell over the gate. The older woman who had thanked her earlier stood up, clutching her purse. Excuse me, she said loudly, addressing the employees. This woman's doing her duty. Y'all really gonna make her stand here and argue about paperwork while that boy waits on the tarmac? The man in the gray suit turned red. Ma'am, please, this doesn't concern you. It sure does, she said. That boy's somebody's son. And that soldier's out there alone while you talk about policies. A few passengers murmured in agreement. Reynolds looked like she was trying not to cry. Maybe we should just... No, the man said sharply. We follow procedure. Brianna's voice was steady again. Sir, I'll wait for your call to the military transport office. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her tone made him hesitate. Fine, he said, pulling out his phone. But when this turns out to be a misunderstanding, don't say we didn't warn you. He stepped aside to make the call. Brianna turned toward Reynolds, her tone softening. I know this isn't on you. You're doing what you're told. Reynolds nodded, biting her lip. I'm sorry, Lieutenant. I really am. Brianna gave a small smile. I've seen worse. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a teenage girl recording discreetly, tears welling up as she mouthed, "Thank you." Minutes passed. The man in the gray suit paced near the counter, phone pressed to his ear. His tone grew sharper. "Yes, I'm aware of that. No, I have a passenger here claiming to be the escort. The manifest doesn't list her name. Yes, I have the case number. Okay, hold on." He turned toward Brianna. "Spell your last name again." "Cole, Lieutenant Brianna Cole." He repeated it into the phone, listened, then frowned. His shoulders dropped slightly. "Oh," he said finally. "I see." He hung up and cleared his throat. Apparently, there was an administrative oversight on the Army's end. "You are listed as the escort. It just didn't populate on the commercial manifest." Reynolds exhaled in relief. "So she's cleared?" "Yes," he said reluctantly. "She's cleared." Brianna gave a slow nod. "Thank you." The passengers around her started clapping quietly. Not a big dramatic applause, just a few people showing respect. The man in the hoodie said under his breath, "About time." The gray-suited manager tried to regain control. "All right, everyone, let's keep things moving. We'll get the remains loaded and board shortly," but his voice didn't carry the same confidence anymore. The power had shifted. Brianna took a slow breath and looked out the window again. The cargo truck began moving toward the aircraft, taillights blinking against the gray morning light. Reynolds leaned closer and said softly, "You really kept your cool." Brianna smiled faintly. "It's what we're trained to do." The older woman who'd spoken earlier gave her a little nod. "You're a good one, sweetheart. That young man's lucky you're the one bringing him home." Brianna swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Thank you, ma'am." For the first time since arriving, she let herself sit down. The folded flag rested in her lap, and her reflection in the terminal window looked tired, but steady. But as the aircraft doors opened and boarding began, Brianna didn't realize this wasn't the end of the conflict. It was just the start of something much louder, because someone had already uploaded the video. The boarding line crept forward, the sound of rolling luggage wheels and murmured voices filling the gate area again. But under all that noise, you could still feel the aftershock of what had just happened. People weren't talking about their flights anymore. They were talking about her. Lieutenant Brianna Cole sat near the window, the folded flag balanced on her knees. Her reflection stared back at her, the soft fabric of her uniform catching the light. She didn't care about the stares, the whispers, or the phones still recording from a distance. She was just thinking about Private Harper, 19 years old, barely out of high school, always cracked jokes, always said he was going to be a teacher one day when the Army was done with him. Now he was heading home in a wooden box. A man in his 60s, salt and pepper beard, plaid shirt, walked over and took the seat next to her. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and respectful. "I saw the whole thing. That was wrong. What they did," Brianna gave him a small nod. "Thank you, sir." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You're doing something honorable." They forgot that. People forget what respect looks like these days. Brianna smiled faintly. Sometimes they just don't understand. Not everyone gets what this means. He nodded slowly. "My brother came home like that, Vietnam. No one met his plane. No flag, just silence. So thank you for doing what you're doing." Her throat tightened. "I'm sorry for your loss." He shook his head gently. "You're making sure someone else's family doesn't go through that alone. That means something." Before Brianna could respond, the gate agent's voice returned over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin boarding Group C for Flight 452 to Norfolk. Please have your boarding passes ready." Reynolds, the same agent from earlier, looked over at Brianna with an apologetic glance. "Lieutenant, we'll board you last, just before the family seats in Norfolk are cleared. They requested privacy. When you arrive." Brianna nodded. "Understood." She waited as passengers filed past, families, business travelers, students. Every few people, someone would glance at her uniform, their eyes softening as if they wanted to say something but didn't know how. When the line had thinned out, Reynolds motioned for her to come forward. Brianna stood, adjusting her cap and tucking the flag carefully under her arm. As she approached the counter, Reynolds spoke quietly. "I just want to say, I'm sorry for the way we handled this earlier." Brianna looked at her, studying her face for a moment. "It's all right. You weren't trying to disrespect anyone. Sometimes policy gets in the way of compassion." Reynolds' eyes watered. "It's not supposed to be like that." No, ma'am, Brianna said softly, but that's the world we live in. The older woman who'd spoken earlier called out from the seating area. You hold your head up, baby. You're doing the Lord's work. Brianna smiled faintly. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. She handed over her boarding pass. Reynolds scanned it, hesitated, then extended her hand. Lieutenant, can I shake yours? Brianna paused, then clasped her hand firmly. Of course. Reynolds squeezed it gently. Safe travels. As Brianna started down the jet bridge, the air felt heavier, quieter. The hum of the engines outside blended with the rhythmic click of her polished boots on the metal walkway. The flag under her arm seemed to weigh more than it should have. Halfway down the bridge, she stopped. Through a small window to her left, she could see the cargo bay door of the aircraft open. Two ground crew members stood near the loading platform, their orange vests bright against the dull morning light. And there it was, the casket. Flag draped, secured, still waiting to be loaded. Brianna pressed her palm to the glass just for a second. Almost home, she whispered. A flight attendant waiting by the plane door noticed her pause. Lieutenant, everything okay? Yes, ma'am, Brianna said, just making sure he's boarded safely. The attendant's face softened. Of course. Take your time. Brianna stepped inside. The cabin was mostly full, passengers murmuring, finding their seats. Some recognized her from the gate and went quiet as she passed. She could feel the weight of their stares, not from judgment, but respect. A man in the front row reached out slightly and said, Thank you, Lieutenant. She nodded once, taking the aisle seat near the back, close to the cargo hold. From there, she could almost feel the presence below her feet, the silent companion she was responsible for. When the doors closed, the flight attendant gave the usual safety briefing, but her tone was softer now, like she knew this flight carried more than passengers. As the plane began to taxi, Brianna stared out the window. The gray sky seemed endless. She thought of Daniel's mother again, how she'd probably been standing in her living room since dawn, pacing, waiting for that plane to land. And she thought about what had just happened at the gate, about how something as simple as a missing name on a form could strip away dignity. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about meaning. Brianna leaned her head back, whispering quietly to herself, This isn't cargo. It's a promise. The man beside her looked up. Sorry, what was that? She gave a small, tired smile. Just talking to myself. He nodded awkwardly. I saw what happened back there. That was something. You handled it better than I would have. Doesn't do any good to yell, Brianna said. People listen better when you stay calm. Still, he said, you shouldn't have had to fight like that just to do the right thing. Brianna glanced at him. Maybe not. But sometimes doing the right thing is the fight. He looked down, thoughtful. I'll remember that. They sat in silence for a while, the steady rumble of the engines filling the cabin. Then, somewhere near takeoff, the man pulled out his phone, scrolled, and frowned. You know that video? The one from the gate? Brianna turned her head slightly. Video? He tilted his screen toward her. There she was, standing in uniform at gate C-17, calm, steady, surrounded by airline staff. The caption read, They tried to stop her from escorting a fallen soldier. It already had thousands of views. Her stomach sank. Oh no. It's everywhere, the man said quietly. People are already talking about it. Brianna looked down at the folded flag again. That wasn't supposed to be a spectacle. He nodded. Maybe not. But sometimes the world needs to see what respect looks like. She didn't respond. She just sat there, staring out the window, watching the clouds rise and blur beneath them. But what she didn't know was that by the time that plane landed in Virginia, millions would already know her name, and the story behind it. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, half the passengers had already seen the clip. A teenage boy a few rows up whispered to his mother, Mom, that's her, the soldier from the video. His mother gave him a quiet look and nodded, then turned in her seat to glance at Brianna. Brianna noticed, but she didn't mind. She wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about the family waiting on the other end. Her hands rested on the folded flag in her lap, fingers brushing lightly over the fabric's smooth surface. The hum of the engines was steady, almost rhythmic, and for a moment she let herself drift into thought. She remembered the last time she saw Private Harper alive. Sand, dust, and exhaustion everywhere. He'd been sitting on a crate of supplies, writing a letter home, saying he missed his mother's Sunday dinners. He'd told Brianna, "Ma'am, I'm not scared of dying. I'm scared of being forgotten." That memory hit harder now than ever. The flight attendant stopped beside her row. "Lieutenant, can I offer you some water?" Brianna shook her head politely. "No, thank you." The attendant hesitated, lowering her voice. "I saw the video. I just want to say, you handled that with a lot of grace." Brianna sighed softly. "It wasn't supposed to be a scene." "I know," the attendant said, "but people need to see what dignity looks like." Most would have lost their temper. You didn't. Brianna managed a small smile. "Losing control doesn't change anything." The attendant nodded. "If you need anything at all, just press the call button." "Thank you, ma'am." As the attendant moved down the aisle, a few more passengers approached quietly. A woman handed her a small handwritten note. "For the family," she whispered. "Just a few words." Brianna opened it. It read, "Your son is not forgotten. His name will be remembered." She folded the paper gently, tucking it into her jacket pocket. "Thank you," she said softly. The woman smiled and returned to her seat, eyes glistening. Across the aisle, a man in a suit was scrolling through his phone, watching a news clip. The headline read, "Airline faces backlash after denying soldier escort boarding privilege." The reporter's voice echoed faintly from his earbuds. "The incident at Dallas Love Field this morning has sparked outrage nationwide. Viewers are calling for an apology to Lieutenant Brianna Cole, seen here remaining calm and respectful while being denied boarding with the remains of Private Daniel Harper." The man looked up from his phone, then turned toward her. "Lieutenant, they're talking about you on the news." Brianna sighed, rubbing her forehead. That didn't take long. He chuckled softly. "No, ma'am. Not these days. I didn't want attention," she said. "This isn't about me." "I think people know that," he said. "That's why it's spreading." "You didn't ask for anything. You just stood your ground." She looked out the window again, clouds rolling by like quiet witnesses. Sometimes, standing your ground is all you can do. The seatbelt sign blinked off. The cabin lights dimmed. Most of the passengers settled into a quiet rhythm, but the energy was different now, more subdued, more thoughtful. Brianna closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about the ceremony ahead, about the Harper family, about the folded flag she would hand over with trembling hands, hoping they'd feel in that gesture everything words couldn't express. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. A message. She hesitated, then unlocked it. It was from Sergeant Major Vance, her commanding officer. "Lieutenant, I saw the footage. You did the right thing. Don't engage with the media. Just bring him home." She exhaled slowly. Bring him home. The words were simple, but they carried the full weight of her responsibility. As the flight continued eastward, the world below was already reacting. Thousands of comments flooded social media. Unbelievable. She's honoring a hero, and they tried to stop her? That woman's composure is something else. Real grace. This is why respect matters, not just in uniforms, everywhere. The airline's official account tried to issue a brief statement, but the public wasn't having it. The video had already been shared millions of times, dissected by commentators, reposted with hashtags like #HonorTheFallen and #LetHerBoard. Meanwhile, Brianna sat quietly in her seat, unaware of the scale of it all. She wasn't chasing recognition or headlines. She was just doing her job, one final act of service. The man beside her spoke again. "You know, my nephew served too. Didn't come home the same. I don't think people realize how much this means, to see someone like you stand up for what's right." Brianna looked at him. "Every soldier deserves to come home with dignity. That's not a privilege, it's a promise." He nodded slowly. "My nephew would have said the same thing." The flight attendant made another announcement, this time quieter, more respectful. "Ladies and gentlemen, as some of you know, we have a military escort traveling with us today, accompanying the remains of a fallen soldier. We ask that you remain seated after landing to allow her to exit first for the transfer ceremony." Every conversation in the cabin stopped. Heads turned. No one clapped. No one cheered. Just silence and respect. Brianna felt her chest tighten. She stared down at the folded flag again. The man beside her whispered, "That's the right kind of silence." She nodded. "It is." The plane began its descent, tilting gently as it broke through the clouds. The horizon glowed faintly gold now, sunlight catching the tops of the trees below. As the wheels touched down, there was no rush to stand, no shuffling for luggage. The passengers stayed seated, waiting, watching. When the doors finally opened, the captain himself stepped into the cabin. He was tall, gray-haired, with a firm but kind expression. "Lieutenant Cole?" he asked quietly. Brianna stood. "Yes, sir." He extended his hand. "It's an honor to have you on my flight, ma'am. The ground crew's ready for the transfer. Take all the time you need." "Thank you, Captain." He looked at the passengers. "Folks, let's give her and the soldiers she's escorting the respect they deserve." Not applause, just silence again. Heads bowed, some tears, some whispers of prayer. Brianna walked slowly down the aisle, every step measured. As she exited the plane, she caught sight of the flag-draped casket waiting on the tarmac. The family stood a few yards away, held upright by sheer will. The air outside was cool, the sky overcast. She paused at the top of the steps, took a breath, and whispered, "We made it." But while she was preparing to hand over that folded flag, the world she left behind in Dallas was on fire. The story had gone from viral clip to national headline, and everyone had something to say about it. The cold Virginia air bit at Brianna's cheeks as she stepped off the plane. Every movement felt heavier, slower, like she was walking through something sacred. The ramp crew stood in a straight line, helmets tucked under their arms, heads bowed. A hearse waited at the edge of the tarmac, back doors open. 2 honor guards stood beside it, white gloves bright against the dull morning sky. The Harper family was there too, Daniel's mother, father, and younger sister. When Brianna approached, the mother broke down, her knees buckling. 2 soldiers caught her gently before she fell. Brianna knelt in front of her, voice soft but steady. "Ma'am, I promised I'd bring him home." Through tears, the mother reached out a trembling hand, touching Brianna's sleeve. "Thank you. Thank you for not leaving him." Brianna swallowed hard. "He was one of ours. We don't leave anyone behind." The family gathered closer as the casket was lifted carefully from the cargo hold. The flag rippled slightly in the wind, and every eye followed it until it was safely inside the hearse. Brianna stood at attention, saluting until the doors closed. Her chest ached, but her face remained composed. The moment the hearse pulled away, she finally let herself exhale, long and slow, like she'd been holding her breath since Dallas. The Harper family came to her again, hugging her like she was one of their own. Daniel's father whispered, "You gave us something no one else could. Peace." Brianna nodded. He earned that peace. As the family drove away, she stood alone on the tarmac for a moment. The noise of the airport faded, replaced by the hum of distant traffic and the sound of her own heartbeat. She thought it was over, but hundreds of miles away, the people she'd left behind at Gate C-17 were still dealing with the fallout. At Dallas Love Field, chaos had erupted in the terminal. Reporters crowded near the security checkpoint, microphones in hand, shouting questions that no one wanted to answer. The video had exploded overnight. Millions of views, trending hashtags, news coverage in every major outlet. Airline executives scrambled to contain the situation. A hastily written statement went out early that morning. "We deeply regret the miscommunication involving a military escort on Flight 452. We are reviewing procedures to ensure such incidents never occur again." But the internet wasn't satisfied. People demanded names, accountability, and apologies. The public wasn't angry at a miscommunication. They were furious at the disrespect. Back in the operations office, the same manager in the gray suit sat across from 2 corporate representatives who had flown in from headquarters. He looked pale, tired, and defeated. One of them, a woman in her 50s, sharp and composed, placed a stack of printed articles on the desk. "You've seen this?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Then you know what kind of damage we're dealing with. This isn't a minor PR issue. This is national." The second representative, a younger man in a navy blazer, leaned forward. "Why didn't you just let her board?" The manager rubbed his eyes. "I followed procedure." The manifest didn't list her name. It wasn't personal. The woman's voice hardened. "Everything becomes personal when you're looking a soldier in the face." He flinched slightly. "I didn't mean any harm." "Intent doesn't matter," she replied coldly. "Impact does." The young man pulled out his phone. "Look at this. Congressman Avery just tweeted about it. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs retweeted him. This is spiraling. The manager slumped in his chair. What do you want me to do? The woman didn't hesitate. You're going to apologize. Publicly, to her and to the family. He hesitated. What if she doesn't want to talk? Then you apologize anyway, she said. On camera. He exhaled, defeated. Yes, ma'am. The room fell silent for a moment before the younger representative spoke again. This could have been avoided with 1 ounce of common sense. The woman nodded. Policies exist to guide people, not replace empathy. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that. Meanwhile, Brianna sat alone in her hotel room in Roanoke. The ceremony was over. The Harper family had invited her to the service the next morning, and she planned to attend in uniform. She turned on the television just to drown out the quiet. But there it was, her face on the screen. The same clip from the airport, the same voiceover explaining the story. Lieutenant Brianna Cole, a U.S. Army officer, stood her ground after airline staff attempted to prevent her from boarding with the remains of a fallen soldier. The confrontation, captured by passengers, has drawn both outrage and admiration across the country. The anchor's tone softened. Many are calling her a symbol of dignity in the face of bureaucracy. Brianna muted the TV. She didn't feel like a symbol. She just felt tired. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Sergeant Major Vance. Media wants interviews. Decline all. You did your job. That's enough. She replied simply. Understood. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her thumb along the edge of the folded flag on the nightstand. In all her years of service, she'd faced danger, loss, and grief. But this was different. This was about decency. Back at the Dallas airport, the manager stood before a row of cameras in the same terminal where it all began. His tie was gone, his voice nervous. I'd like to apologize, he began, to Lieutenant Cole, to the Harper family, and to all those who serve. What happened at Gate C-17 was wrong. I failed to show the respect our service members deserve. The reporters fired questions. Have you spoken to her? Will the airline compensate the family? Are you resigning? He didn't answer. He just stared down at his notes. Behind the cameras, a small crowd of travelers watched. Some nodded, some whispered, some recorded him, just like they'd recorded her. When the broadcast aired that evening, people didn't feel satisfaction. They felt shame, not just for one man's mistake, but for how easily society forgets to feel. Brianna watched the clip from her hotel room, expression unreadable. She didn't smile, didn't frown. She just turned off the TV and looked out the window. The streetlights flickered below. She whispered to herself, this was never about me. It was about him. She looked down at the folded flag again, resting her hand on it like a promise renewed. But the next morning, when she arrived at the church for the funeral, she realized the story had grown far beyond the airline or the airport. People she'd never met were waiting there. And not all of them came for the soldier. Some came for her. The morning sky hung low and gray over Roanoke, Virginia. The streets were quiet, except for the soft toll of church bells echoing through the mist. Rows of cars lined both sides of the narrow street leading to St. Mary's Baptist Church, where the Harper family had gathered to say goodbye. Lieutenant Brianna Cole stood at the gate, uniform perfectly pressed, the folded flag tucked under her arm. She could hear the choir inside warming up, the soft hum of voices singing Amazing Grace. The sound seemed to settle in her chest like a weight. As she approached the church steps, she stopped short. There were people outside, more than she expected, not just family or neighbors, but strangers, veterans in worn uniforms, mothers holding small flags, even young people she didn't recognize, holding signs that read, Honor the Fallen, and Thank you, Lieutenant Cole. Her breath caught for a second. She wasn't used to being the one people stared at. A middle-aged woman stepped forward, her eyes wet. Ma'am, we came to pay our respects. Not just for Private Harper, for you too. Brianna shook her head gently. I appreciate that, but today isn't about me. The woman nodded, voice trembling. Maybe not, but what you did reminded people what honor looks like. Before Brianna could respond, she felt a soft hand on her shoulder. She turned and saw Daniel Harper's father, his eyes red but steady. Lieutenant, he said quietly. Come on inside. Your family now. She swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, sir. Inside the church, the air felt heavy with grief. Rows of mourners filled every pew. At the front of the sanctuary, the flag-draped casket rested under the soft glow of the stained glass window. The colored light reflected off the stars and stripes, casting red and blue across the polished wood. Brianna walked down the aisle, each step echoing softly on the floor. The choir stopped singing as she approached. All eyes followed her as she stood at attention near the casket. When she spoke, her voice was low but clear. Private First Class Daniel Harper served his country with courage and faith. He gave everything he had, and it's my honor to stand here today to bring him home. The mother began to sob again, clutching a handkerchief. Brianna took a slow breath and stepped forward. She knelt, holding the folded flag between her hands. The church was completely silent now. No whispers, no movement, just the sound of quiet tears. She looked at Daniel's mother and said softly, "On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of your son's honorable service and sacrifice." The woman reached out, her hands trembling as she took it. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. "Thank you for not letting him be treated like cargo." Brianna's eyes glistened. "He wasn't cargo, ma'am. He was a hero." The church erupted in quiet weeping. Some people bowed their heads. Others whispered prayers. Brianna stood again, saluted, and took a single step back. Her throat burned, but she held it together. That was what Daniel deserved. Dignity to the very end. After the service, she stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. The crowd had grown even larger. Reporters stood behind the fence, cameras lowered out of respect. Dozens of strangers lined the street, silent as the funeral procession began. The hearse pulled away slowly, followed by a convoy of family cars. People placed their hands over their hearts as it passed. Others saluted. Brianna stood at the curb, watching the line disappear over the hill. Then she heard a voice beside her. "Lieutenant Cole?" She turned. It was a local news reporter, microphone lowered, her expression genuine. "I know you don't want interviews," the woman said softly, "but can I ask one thing off camera?" Brianna hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead. Why did you stay so calm back at the airport? Most people would have lost it." Brianna looked down for a moment, choosing her words. "Because anger doesn't teach anyone anything. Respect does." The reporter's eyes softened. "That's powerful." Brianna shrugged gently. "I didn't plan it that way. I just did what I thought was right." The woman nodded. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Later that evening, Brianna returned to her hotel. The sun had set, painting the sky in muted orange and purple. She set her cap on the dresser, loosened her jacket, and sat on the bed, staring at the TV remote in her hand. She didn't want to see her face on another screen. She didn't want to read comments or see hashtags. She wanted quiet. But curiosity got the better of her. She turned on the TV. The headline read, "Lieutenant Brianna Cole, the soldier who wouldn't back down." Clips from the funeral played, her speech, the flag presentation, the silent salute. The anchor's voice narrated, "What began as an airport dispute has become a moment of reflection across the country. Lieutenant Cole's calm defiance has reminded millions of Americans what dignity and honor truly mean." Brianna muted the TV, leaned back, and let out a long sigh. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt human, flawed, tired, and grateful that Daniel was finally home. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't her superior. It was an unknown number. She opened the message. "Lieutenant Cole, this is Director Alan Pierce, American Airlines. We'd like to personally apologize and offer to meet regarding new escort policies. Please let us know your availability." She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "No need for a meeting. Just make sure the next soldier doesn't have to go through that." She hit send and set the phone down. The room fell into silence again. The kind of silence that follows storms, heavy but peaceful. She looked at the folded flag resting on the dresser. It was just fabric and thread, but to her, it felt like the heartbeat of everything she stood for. She whispered quietly, "You're home, Harper." Mission complete. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to cry. Not from anger, not from exhaustion, but from release. But the story wasn't over yet. Because while she found peace, the world outside was still talking. And what people chose to do next would define whether this moment became just another viral story or a real change. The next morning, the fog rolled low over the Virginia hills, clinging to the road like a blanket that didn't want to let go. Lieutenant Brianna Cole sat in the back of a black sedan, her uniform once again spotless, her cap resting neatly in her lap. The folded flag rode beside her in a hard case. The funeral was over. The ceremony had ended, but the weight of it all, the faces, the silence, the tears, still pressed heavy against her heart. The driver glanced at her in the mirror. "Ma'am, headed straight to the airport?" "Yes, thank you," she said quietly. He nodded. "You did good, you know. My cousin was there yesterday. She said the whole town hasn't stopped talking about it." Brianna stared out the window, watching the trees blur past. "It wasn't about me. I know," he said, "but sometimes it takes one person doing the right thing to remind everyone else what the right thing even looks like." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. When they reached the airport, she stepped out into the crisp air and looked up at the terminal. This time, there were no cameras, no reporters, no chaos. Just travelers going about their day. For a brief moment, she could almost pretend nothing had happened. Inside, the airline staff recognized her immediately. A young man at the counter straightened his tie and said, "Lieutenant Cole, welcome back. Everything's already taken care of for your return flight." She gave a polite nod. "Appreciate it." He hesitated. We wanted to say thank you for how you handled things." Brianna tilted her head slightly. "Just doing my job." "Still," he said, "you showed us something. Everyone in this terminal's been talking about it for days." She offered a faint smile. "Then I hope it leads to change." He nodded firmly. "It already has. New protocols being drafted. Military escorts are now cleared for priority handling. No exceptions." For the first time since the whole ordeal began, Brianna felt something shift inside. A small flicker of relief. "That's good to hear," she said softly. "Thank you." He handed her the boarding pass. "Safe flight, ma'am." The flight back to Dallas was quieter than the one before. The cabin lights were dimmed, the passengers subdued. Brianna sat by the window again, watching the sunrise stretch over the clouds. Gold light spilled across her uniform, the edges of the folded flag case glinting faintly beside her. No one bothered her this time. A few passengers gave small nods as they passed, the kind that said everything without words. The flight attendant approached halfway through the flight. It was a different one this time, a younger woman with kind eyes. "Lieutenant, can I get you anything? Coffee, water?" Brianna shook her head. "I'm fine, thank you." The attendant smiled. "I read about you. My brother's a Marine. What you did, it meant a lot to people like us." Brianna smiled faintly. "I just did what any soldier would have done." The attendant nodded. "Maybe, but not everyone would have had your patience." Brianna looked down at her hands. "Patience doesn't come easy, but it's the only way people learn." The attendant lingered for a second. "You think people really learned something from all this?" Brianna turned to the window, watching the light flicker over the wing. "I think they learned to look twice, to think before they dismiss someone, and maybe to remember what honor really looks like." The attendant smiled softly. "That's a good answer." As she walked away, Brianna leaned back in her seat. Her phone buzzed again. Another flood of unread messages. Reporters, supporters, strangers. People thanking her. People demanding interviews. She ignored them all. She wasn't chasing attention. She wasn't chasing gratitude. She was just going home. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift. For a brief, gentle moment, she imagined Daniel Harper laughing again. That goofy, unstoppable grin from the desert, when everything was falling apart, but he'd still managed to make them smile. He'd tell her not to worry. He'd probably joke that he got the best escort the Army could have sent, and she'd probably roll her eyes and say, "You better appreciate that, Private." The memory made her smile. When the plane touched down in Dallas, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we disembark, I'd like to acknowledge Lieutenant Brianna Cole, who's returning home after completing an escort mission of honor. On behalf of the crew, thank you for your service, ma'am." The cabin erupted in soft applause, not loud, not performative, just gentle, respectful, the kind that felt real. Brianna didn't stand right away. She just nodded quietly, eyes still fixed on the window. "Thank you," she whispered. As the passengers began to file out, an older man paused by her row. "Lieutenant," he said, "I saw what you did." My son's buried in Arlington. What you did matters. Brianna looked up at him. So does what he did. The man smiled sadly. You're right about that. When the aisle finally cleared, Brianna stood, gathering her things. The folded flag rested safely in its case, now part of her, a reminder of the promise she'd kept. Outside the terminal, the Texas sun was already blazing. The noise of cars, conversations, and announcements filled the air. Life moved on. But for Brianna, everything felt a little quieter. She found a bench near the drop-off lane, set her bag beside her, and took a slow breath. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and coffee. She pulled out her phone one last time. The top headline read, Airline introduces new policy honoring military escorts after viral incident. She read the first line out loud, barely above a whisper. It shouldn't take a viral video to remind people of respect. Still, she couldn't help but feel hopeful. A text popped up from Sergeant Major Vance. Welcome home, Lieutenant. Job well done. She smiled to herself. Yes, sir, she murmured. Then, looking up at the sky where another jet roared overhead, she whispered, Rest easy, Harper. We got it right this time. She sat there for a while, letting the warmth of the sun settle on her face, the hum of life returning all around her. But as she would soon learn, the story didn't just end there, because what happened next wasn't about her anymore. It was about everyone who saw her, remembered her, and decided to act differently because of it. It started small. Just a few hundred shares on social media, a handful of supportive comments from veterans and families. But within 48 hours, Lieutenant Brianna Cole's calm defiance had become the center of a nationwide discussion. News outlets replayed the footage from Gate C-17 on loop. Brianna standing tall in uniform, the airline staff hesitating, passengers watching in silence. The audio wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. People heard enough. I'm not here on vacation, she'd said. I'm escorting a fallen soldier who gave everything for this country. Please, let me do my duty. Those words struck like lightning. They were quoted on talk shows, printed on headlines, stitched into memes, repeated on podcasts. But what resonated most wasn't the speech. It was her composure. Brianna hadn't shouted. She hadn't cursed. She hadn't demanded anything. She'd just stood her ground, calm, firm, unshakable. And that, somehow, cut deeper than anger ever could. Within days, her name was everywhere. Military families sent letters to the Pentagon, urging new protections for escort officers. Lawmakers mentioned her on the floor of Congress during a discussion about veteran respect. Veterans groups started fundraising drives to assist families who couldn't afford travel for ceremonies. At the same time, the airline's public relations department was drowning. Their official apology aired on every major network, complete with the CEO himself appearing on camera. We failed to honor a service member the way we should have. Lieutenant Cole showed us what respect truly looks like. We're implementing new training programs immediately. For once, the apology didn't feel corporate. It felt embarrassed. People online debated every frame of the video. What should have happened, what could have happened, what it said about society as a whole. Some called Brianna a hero. Others said she was just doing her job. But everyone agreed on one thing. The moment had hit a nerve. Meanwhile, Brianna stayed quiet. Back in Dallas, she returned to her base routine. Reports, morning briefings, short runs in the heat. She tried to move on, but it was impossible to walk through the commissary or gas station without someone recognizing her. One afternoon, she was fueling her car when a teenage boy in a baseball cap approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "You're Lieutenant Cole, right?" She turned, startled. "Yes." He smiled nervously. "I just wanted to say, my brother's in the Army." He said what you did made him proud. Brianna softened. "Tell your brother thank you. And stay proud of him, too." He nodded. "We all are." When he walked away, she stood there for a moment, letting it sink in. She'd never wanted fame. But if her story could make even one soldier's life a little easier, maybe it was worth it. A week later, she was called into a meeting with her commanding officer. Sergeant Major Vance sat behind his desk, scrolling through something on his tablet. He looked up when she entered. "At ease, Lieutenant. Have a seat." "Yes, sir." He placed the tablet down. "You know you've caused quite a stir." She gave a faint, uneasy smile. "So I've heard." "Good stir," he said. "Command's reviewing escort protocols across every commercial carrier now. The Department of Defense wants to ensure there's never another Gate C-17. She exhaled slowly. That's good, sir. He leaned back, folding his hands. You did right, Cole. You showed the kind of discipline we talk about but don't always see. I'm proud of you. Her throat tightened slightly. Thank you, sir. He hesitated before continuing. You'll be getting a letter of commendation, maybe even recognition from the secretary's office. I know that's not why you did it, but it's coming. Brianna shook her head gently. Sir, I didn't do anything special. I just stood where I was supposed to stand. He smiled faintly. Sometimes, Lieutenant, that's exactly what leadership looks like. That night, back in her apartment, she finally let herself scroll through the messages. Thousands of them. Emails, comments, letters, some from soldiers, some from widows, some from complete strangers who'd seen something in her that reminded them of what they'd lost faith in. One message stood out. It was from a woman in Ohio. My husband's remains came home 5 years ago. I didn't have an escort. They told me no one was available. Watching you made me realize I should have spoken up. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. Brianna read it 3 times before setting her phone down. She didn't reply. She didn't know how to, but it stayed with her. She stepped out onto her balcony, looking up at the sky. Planes blinked faintly in the distance, red and white dots cutting through the night. She wondered how many soldiers were being carried home right now, how many escorts were quietly sitting beside a folded flag somewhere at 30,000 feet. It was humbling. The following week, she was invited to Washington, D.C. to attend a ceremony recognizing exemplary acts of dignified service. She didn't want to go at first, but her commander insisted. The hall was filled with veterans, families, and officials. The Secretary of Defense stood at the podium. Today, he said, we honor those who remind us that duty doesn't end when the battle is over. It lives in the quiet moments, in the acts of respect that no one asks for, but everyone remembers. Then he turned toward her. Lieutenant Brianna Cole, your courage and restraint reminded a nation that honor has no schedule, no paperwork, no policy. On behalf of a grateful country, thank you. The audience rose to their feet, the applause thunderous but sincere. Brianna stepped forward, accepted the plaque, and said quietly into the microphone, respect isn't something you request. It's something you show. Every soldier deserves that. Every person does. Her words were short, but they hit hard. When she returned home that night, she placed the plaque on a small shelf next to her service medals, but her eyes always drifted to the folded flag beside them. She whispered, we made it, Harper. You started something bigger than both of us. She turned off the lights and sat in the dark for a long time. The noise of the world, the chatter, the debates, the viral videos, had all faded. What remained was quiet, the kind that follows change. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But something real had shifted. And yet, in the silence that followed, one final question lingered. What do we do with moments like this, once the cameras stop and the applause dies down? Weeks passed, the world moved on, the headlines faded, and new stories filled the airwaves. But for Lieutenant Brianna Cole, life hadn't gone back to normal. It had just grown quieter. She kept to her daily rhythm. Morning runs before sunrise, quick coffee at the same gas station, a few words exchanged with the clerk who always greeted her with, "Good morning, Lieutenant." She liked that. Simple, human. Sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she still saw the woman standing at Gate C-17, steady, unshaken, holding her ground for a soldier who couldn't speak for himself. Other times, she just saw a tired officer who wanted the world to remember that respect shouldn't have to be taught through conflict. On a Saturday morning, she drove out to the Dallas-Fort Worth National Cemetery. The sky was overcast, the air still. She parked her car near a row of new headstones and walked quietly, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. When she reached Daniel Harper's grave, she stood still for a long moment. The headstone was simple, his name, rank, and a small engraved cross above the words, "Forever in our hearts." Someone had left fresh flowers and a folded note tucked beneath them. Brianna knelt and brushed a leaf off the stone. "Hey kid," she whispered, "you made more noise back home than you ever did in the field." She smiled faintly at the memory of him cracking jokes after long marches, the way he'd always try to lighten the mood when things got rough. "You were right, you know. You said you didn't want to be forgotten. I think it's safe to say that won't be happening anytime soon." The wind picked up slightly, tugging at her uniform. She stayed kneeling, eyes on the inscription. They changed the policy, she said quietly. Now every soldier gets what you deserved from the start. No one travels alone anymore, she paused. That's because of you. For a while, she just sat there, listening to the faint rustle of the trees. There was no ceremony, no audience, just one soldier keeping her promise to another. After a few minutes, she stood, straightened her jacket, and saluted. Rest easy, Private Harper, she said softly. Mission complete. Then she turned and began walking back toward her car, her boots leaving faint imprints in the damp grass. That afternoon, she met with a group of young ROTC cadets at a local community center. They had invited her to speak, though she hadn't planned a speech. She didn't need one. The room was filled with eager faces, teenagers in pressed uniforms, trying to look confident, but not quite pulling it off. One of them, a tall boy with nervous energy, raised his hand. Ma'am, do you ever get scared? You know, when people don't listen, or when you have to stand up like that? Brianna thought for a moment. Scared? Sure, everyone gets scared, but courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing your duty anyway. Another cadet asked, Did you know that video was being recorded? She smiled slightly. No, and I'm glad I didn't, because if I had, maybe I would have acted different. And sometimes the best thing you can do is act like nobody's watching. The room went quiet. She continued, What happened at that airport wasn't about me. It was about a choice. Every day, we all get small chances to do the right thing, to show dignity, even when no one deserves it, even when nobody's clapping for it. That's what service is. That's what honor is. The kids nodded, soaking in every word. A young girl in the front row spoke up softly. Ma'am, do you think people really changed because of what happened? Brianna looked around the room, at the faces of a new generation watching her, waiting for an answer. I think some did, she said finally. And if even one person treats another human being with more respect because of it, that's enough for me. The room filled with a deep, understanding silence, the kind that comes from truth. Later that evening, she sat on her porch, the Texas sky glowing orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. A soft breeze moved through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of distant traffic and the hum of a world that, for once, felt a little gentler. She scrolled through her phone absent-mindedly, pausing on a new headline. Airline honors fallen soldiers with annual memorial flight, inspired by Gate C-17. Her lips curved into a small, contented smile. She didn't share it. She didn't comment. She just put her phone down and looked toward the horizon. The folded flag sat on her coffee table inside, framed in glass now, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that integrity still mattered, that humanity wasn't lost, and that sometimes one quiet act of respect could ripple farther than anger ever could. She closed her eyes, letting the last rays of sunlight brush her face. Thank you, Harper, she whispered. For a long time, she just sat there. No cameras, no crowd, no applause. Just the quiet reward of knowing she'd kept her word. Sometimes, the smallest stand makes the loudest noise. Lieutenant Brianna Cole didn't fight with anger. She fought with patience, grace, and unshakable respect. In a world quick to argue and slow to listen, she reminded us that dignity doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs a backbone. Maybe that's the lesson for all of us. It's not the titles, the uniforms, or the cameras that define honor. It's what we do when no one's looking. It's choosing respect over pride, empathy over ego, and courage over comfort. So, next time you're standing at your own Gate C-17 moment, whether that's in an airport, a workplace, or even at home, remember Brianna's words. This isn't cargo. It's a promise: show compassion, show humanity, show respect, because sometimes that's the difference between a moment forgotten and a legacy that lasts. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Take a moment to thank someone who serves. Offer kindness where it's not expected. And when you see someone doing the right thing quietly, let them know it matters. Because the world doesn't change in noise. It changes in moments of quiet honor.